How's it going?
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the Revolutionary Woman podcast. Woman spelled with an A.
All right. Welcome to our podcast show. We're so glad that you're here, but buckle your seatbelts because you're in for a treat with this one. Honestly, I had so much fun putting my thoughts together surrounding the topic that we're going to discuss today because I think I've learned a lot regarding friendships and boundaries the hard way. But I love the topic of boundaries. Honestly, these days I'm feeling a little like the boundary queen, which I have not always been, and I'm much more cautious than I used to be about who I give my heart to and who I even give my time to. So, just to kind of let you know, on our last episode, Girl, You Need a Friend, in which we discussed the importance of healthy friendships. While we were recording that episode, Lisa and I were reminded that it's impossible to even have healthy friendships without having healthy boundaries, because healthy people with healthy boundaries make for relationships that are rich and fulfilling. So the thing is, guys, and we talked about this a lot in the last podcast, you don't really need a lot of friends. You just need a few solid friends. So in this episode, we're going to do some real talk about boundaries, what they are, who needs them. We're going to give a little litmus test for relationships, some signs of toxic friends, and even talk about how to break up with those friends. So I'll be honest, the topic of boundaries is one that I wouldn't have known much to even be able to talk about just 7 years or so ago. I had zero boundaries and pretty much believed that it was my responsibility to just be friendly and friends with everybody and make everybody happy. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to discuss boundaries, because I have found them to be so helpful in my own life in bringing some clarity around relationships. Because as we all know, women relationships, whether it's boy to girl or girl to girl, can be complicated. Is that the word, Lisa?
Well, I think we're complicated creatures, and that's not a bad thing. I just feel like we have a lot of moving parts within us in our minds and in our emotions. There's a lot more movement overall. So,
Definitely.
yes.
Yeah, definitely so. So I thought that it would be good for us to start out with talking about what are boundaries? Like, what actually does that mean? A lot of people are not even aware that this is a thing, that they need that. And it's not something that we need only in friendships. We need it in every relationship, like relationships with family members. Every relationship, in order to be healthy, needs healthy boundaries. And so I kind of tried to do some research to define what is a boundary. And really, it's just a property line. And so and I really like the way that, who is it? Townsend. What's his first name?
Is it Henry Townsend?
Henry Townsend. And then what's the other boundaries guy?
His last name's Cloud.
Yes, Henry Cloud. That's who I'm thinking. So he wrote the book Boundaries. If you have not read that book, you need to go find it ASAP and make it part of your library. You're going to want to read it more than one time. Do you have that book, Lisa?
I do.
Yeah.
And I have Boundaries with Children too, which is really good. But any of the Boundaries books are excellent.
Yeah, I think it's broken up. Like, they have boundaries with teenagers, boundaries with friendships in different topics. I think I just read the original Boundaries book. Since then, he's done some others, but highly recommend that book. I think he's a relational psychologist or something like that. And that's all he does is teach and write on boundaries. I think he has like a call-in show where he takes calls, but super good information. So if you have never read that book and you have any relationships in your life that are complicated, or maybe you just want to work on being more healthy, definitely pick up the book. But he explains the concept of boundaries, like looking at it as property, like that if you look at your life as a house, and everyone else, or your friends, like your neighbors that live around you, and you have your house and you have your yard, and they have their house and their yard. So the only way to have a healthy relationship between one another is to have like a clear understanding of where your property line ends and where my property line begins, so that we can stay within those boundaries. Because if you think about it, and some of you may have had neighbors like this, where you do your best to keep your yard really neat and presentable, and then you have a neighbor like where where they don't try it all and all their stuff just growing into your yard, how long is it going to take you before you're like pissed? Because
or
like
calling the HOA, asking them why they haven't done their job.
exactly. So we own the deed only to our property, our
Correct.
life, no one else's. So boundaries are there to protect feelings, our choices, behaviors, values, and even opinions. So if your neighbor is a good neighbor, and if your friend is a good friend, they will be willing to honor those things. And if they don't honor those things, if they don't honor your boundaries, it can be a sign that they are an unhealthy person and maybe even toxic. So boundaries are in place to protect one another, not to just protect ourselves, but also to protect the relationship. So yeah. Do you have any like examples of like boundaries and how you've used them or not used them in your own relationships?
So I would probably say that I didn't understand boundaries until about 5 or so years ago in friendships. I was a lot like you, where I felt like I had to be nice to everybody and I had to allow everybody in my life. And but yet at the same time, I also had this fear of people like using stuff against me. So it was, there was a lot of emotions caught up into it. So I would say that I really didn't have boundaries, and then starting to understand them, and then starting to really, I would say, I mean, for me, I would definitely say that I think I've been a toxic friend in the past because I didn't know how to be a friend. And so for me, it was learning to take full responsibility for my behavior and understand. That was another thing I took on, is like other people's emotions and other people's, almost like their decisions. Like if I was somehow connected with them, I felt like their decisions were reflective of me. Right. And I had to learn how to draw that line. And even things that I might have said, I remember having a specific time with a friend where I said something and my motive was right. Everything about it was right, but their feelings were hurt. And I remember telling her, I said, listen, I'm sorry that your feelings were hurt, but that was not my intention. And I cannot take responsibility for how you feel. I can take responsibility for my words. I don't regret them, and I'm not sorry for them. I'm sorry for the hurt they caused, but I'm not responsible for you being upset with me. That's your choice, because I know what my motive was. And so like learning how to communicate that. Yeah. Because I think that's a lot of what boundaries is communication. People have a hard time communicating clearly and communicating in love. So I would say for me, it's just been a recent development that has brought immense peace to my life.
It absolutely does. It preserves your peace, but it also preserves the relationship. Because for me personally, one of the things I honestly just didn't have an understanding or even an awareness of the need for boundaries for most of my adult life. It's just not something that I knew about. And so in relationships, whether that was friendships, even within family, like I was just always trying to fix things for everybody, or make sure that everybody was happy. Or if, you know, a friend or a family member was mad, like in my head, it was my job to fix that for them so that the relationship would be quote unquote smooth again or okay again. But once I started to learn about boundaries, I understood that other people's feelings and their junk and their weeds and their overgrown bushes and the stuff that they are not willing to deal with are not my problem. And I think I started to really embrace that when I started to do a lot of my own inner work on just working on myself, growing. Listen, when you get in counseling and you're paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars to work on yourself and to work on your issues, and then you realize that the people you're in relationship are not working on their issues, and then they're bringing their drama, they're bringing their baggage, they're bringing their toxic junk over into your life, and here you are trying to get better and trying to get whole,
get rid of the junk.
It starts to become personal at that point. It's like you're dragging your nastiness into my yard that I'm trying to work on getting manicured and cleaned up and presentable so that it can, be a good, I love the whole yard analogy. So I'll probably keep It makes it make sense to me. You don't just get to come over here and throw your weed seeds in my yard that I'm working on.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And so that's why I think boundaries are so important. And here's one of the things that boundaries do. When you start to put them in place, they pretty much weed out people who are not willing to bear with you on that. Like,
Absolutely.
if a person won't tolerate you putting up boundaries, then they're not someone that you need in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it does come down to a communication thing. It's hard to go to somebody and say, hey, I know this is how it's been for X amount of years, but I'm not doing this anymore. Like, this is how it's going to be for me to stay in this relationship. And I love you. I want the relationship, but it has to change because I'm not healthy without it. And it's never easy to have that conversation. But it's so necessary. So like, boundaries protect us from suffering the consequences of other people's unwillingness to take responsibility of their own behavior. And I think an important thing to talk about here is that boundaries are not a wall. We have to look at boundaries as more of a fence line.
Yes.
That is saying, I'm not trying to shut you out. It's saying, here's my space, here's your space, and you are welcome to come on over for some good, healthy relationship, but you are not allowed to just march in my front door anytime you want.
Right.
And I'm not good with your dead trees and your out of control grass and your poorly raised kids and psychotic pets. Like coming into my yard to become my problem when I've been working hard to keep my yard, quote unquote, nice and my children and pets under control. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes complete sense. You're like, and your psychotic pet.
And that's right. Your psychotic pets pooping in my yard.
And not picking up your mess. Yes.
Absolutely. But so boundaries, they're so important because they protect our heart, mind, and soul. And they don't stifle relationship, but they allow us freedom to love and support one another in a healthy and honest way. It's kind of like boundaries are just a loving way of saying, hey, if you want to be in relationship with me, then you're going to have to take responsibility for you, because I don't want or need or even have time to fix you or change you or prop you up, and I sure as heck am not willing to pay the price for your unwillingness to take responsibility for your own self.
I think it can be very interesting when you meet and talk to people, because some people grew up with boundaries and some people grew up in a family or in a lifestyle where blame was always shifted to somebody else. So they never had to take responsibility. And then you've got people that were always take the responsibility, even when the responsibility is not theirs. They felt like it was their job or their role to do that. So I feel like there's three main categories. Jesus have mercy on me tonight.
You're good.
But three main categories where you've got people that know how to do their boundaries. You've got people that take all the responsibility no matter what's going on, and the people that take no responsibility for what's going on. So, and then when you realize what type of person that you can be, and some people may feel like they're always the one to take responsibility. For me, when I've done self-reflection in the past, I realized that I did take a lot of responsibility for some things, but there were some things that I would blame shift for and that I needed to learn to take responsibility for and learn to clean up my mess so that I could be a person of boundaries. I would probably say I was like 75-25. So 75 taking on the feelings or the emotions or the decisions of others, and then 25 blame shifting, because I had so much that I was taking on that I had to shove the other stuff off to the side and give it to somebody else so I could handle what wasn't mine. You know what I mean? So I think that we have those three categories, and when we can learn to identify where we are, and even being okay with saying, I have boundaries in these areas and I'm really good here, but I seem to take on this in this area, or I don't take any responsibility in this area. I think it's learning to be very brutally honest with yourself and asking the Holy Spirit, like, show me, like, I think I'm a person that has full-time boundaries, but maybe there's some missing links. Maybe there's some things that I need to work on. And so I think it takes that submission to Holy Spirit, that openness, to figure out where you are, because I think that you can be a different thing in different areas.
Absolutely. And I would tend to say that I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And I do think that like how you were raised, your personality,
Mhm.
even birth order, like all of those
Yes.
things affect. And
Yes.
so for me, because I was used to being the oldest and I was kind of had to be the responsible one, it
Hmm.
is still something that I have to fight to not be the fixer and to have a lack of boundaries as in what am not willing to do for certain relationships in my life. Even with family. And so you can be trying to do good things, but you're doing good things is actually damaging, because here's what happened with me. I was the fixer and I would do all the things, but at the end of the day, I was so resentful. Like,
Right.
and and I don't even think I was aware of how resentful I was until all of those things can really add up and even begin to affect your body. Like it
Hmm.
can turn into true physical symptoms. And I think it was when that started to happen to me in my early 30s that I started having weird issues, that I had to evaluate my life and even my relationships and go, okay, I've become unhealthy in not just my body, but in other areas that I think is contributing to my issues. And it kind of forced me, and I'm thankful that I was able to come to that awareness. And I love what you said about staying open to the Holy Spirit to reveal things to you and
Hmm.
show you areas in your life where you may be lacking or not being aware.
Well, I think just like you said, how boundaries are fences, I think it's really important for us to realize that boundaries are fences with other people, but also within ourselves, understanding that we have to do a lot of reassessment. That's
Yes.
why, you and I are really big on self reflection,
Uh-huh.
asking Holy Spirit to reveal those things to us. Because again, if there's one thing I believe the Holy Spirit will do is when we ask him to show us something, he will do it. He will do what he says he's going to do. And so just understanding that reassessment isn't always about the other people in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
but about us. Okay, where am I? Maybe have I slipped up and started taking responsibility for somebody's emotions where I shouldn't have? How is
Yes.
that affecting me? How is that affecting my family? Even I think about it even now. A lot of times I heard a lot growing up, you make me this. And I've noticed that sometimes I even do that with my kids, like, oh, you're making me angry. And then
Yes.
I have to go back and say, actually, I don't like what you're doing, but it is my choice to be angry, because
Mhm.
I'm having to teach my kids now that their emotional state is not somebody else's problem. It is their choice.
Yes.
So they might have hurt your feelings and that might be legitimate, but you're choosing to stay hurt and you're choosing to lash back out at it.
Mhm.
So just teaching them even the fences now at such a
Mhm.
young age, I think it's really important to realize that you reassess the person and then you also reassess yourself. So,
That is so good. It's such a cool thing that you are able to teach your kids that, because how much pain is that going to save them later on in life? Because a pattern that I fell into for a lot of my life was, it was a dynamic in a relationship where one person was always getting offended, and then there was another person in the relationship that didn't like any kind of conflict, and so they would come to me and say, so and so is really upset or whatever. It could have been something I did or something somebody else did, but basically you need to go talk to them and fix it. And like I did that because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And it was
mhm,
literally, I'm 37 years old, and it wasn't till just like a few years ago that I realized and understood that other people's emotions and feelings, and like that's not my responsibility. I'm not
it's
saying that
not.
that's gives us free reign to just trample on people. That is not at all what I'm talking about. Obviously, we should care about things that we do and say and how it affects people.
Right,
But I'm
right.
just talking about in general, other people's emotions aren't our responsibility. And as the important thing is this, I don't tend to do well with people that are not growth oriented, meaning people that are fine to stay just where they are and the way they are. I'm really I mean, this might sound ugly, but I'm really not interested in even having friendships or relationships with people that are just fine to stay because of the fact that healthy relationships only come from healthy people.
Yes.
So once I identify, no matter how much, I mean, I have a person in my life now, like I love her to pieces,
Hmm.
truly love her, but she is not a healthy person. And I'm not saying that at all in an ugly or demeaning way, but I mean, emotionally, spiritually not healthy. And it comes out in so many ways. And so I've realized that I kind of have to distance myself from that
Right.
because my tendency is to want to fix it or get really resentful and bitter about it. And so, an important thing for us to do is to take a good look at someone's life in general. We talked about
Yes.
being a fruit inspector.
Yes.
We don't have to judge anybody, but we can inspect the fruit that's coming out of their life. So, does this person that you're friends with or maybe considering being friends with, do they even live the kind of life you would want to live? And
Right.
I'm not talking about what kind of house they live in. That's surfacey. That's not what I'm talking about. But, not that they don't have issues, because we all have our issues, or that they're perfect. But in general, is this person growing? Are they a giver? Meaning, do they have anything to give?
Hmm.
And I'm not just talking financially, but or is it a one-sided relationship? Are
Right.
they like, do they take responsibility? Do they work on their issues? What is their mindset like? What's the fruit of their life? That's really important for us to identify. I think can save a lot of frustration and pain. Um,
I
but
think growth oriented is not a bad thing to look for in people at all.
mhm.
You said it a whole lot nicer than I would have. I don't like when people suck the life out of me. And if you
Oh
suck
yeah.
the life out of me,
Hmm.
most likely I'm not spending time with you, or I'm trying to avoid spending time with you.
Hmm.
Um, or if I do spend time with you, I'm spending time with you with other people that won't suck the
Hmm.
life out of me.
Yes.
And I've told people before, like, you suck the life out of me. And that's not the nicest way to say it, but I tend to be a little bit more brash about things like that. But when you were talking about inspecting fruit, I think one thing to look at too is that you do have to look at other people's relationships. Do they have long-term friendships, or are they constantly starting new friendships? They're
Yeah.
having to go from group to group to group to group, or person to person to person to person, or this was my, you know what I mean? Like, it's when you recognize those people. For me in my life, I've recognized people like that, and I just take a step back. I just take a
Hmm.
step back. It doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize them. I would probably consider, there's 4 categories of friendship. You have acquaintance, friend, close friend, and then your best friend.
Yeah.
And I think that it's okay. You can keep those people at acquaintance level. It's
Hmm.
okay. They can just know the surface level stuff. Not everybody needs to know the nitty gritty stuff.
Hmm.
So just looking at the entirety of the situation of the person, and asking for Holy Spirit for discernment. Again, this isn't a judgmental thing. This
Yeah.
isn't trying to throw people under the bus. This is I need to be aware. I need to be aware of what I'm allowing in my life. And you want to look for somebody who gives back to you. To me, my best friendships are the people where there's a constant exchange,
Yes.
where it's not one person doing all the work. It is a constant back and forth. And I'm not talking about necessarily on a daily basis, because
Hmm.
life happens, but it's always a person who's willing to volley it back to you, volley the ball back to you when
Hmm.
you volleyed it to them. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's just a
Yeah.
constant back and forth. So
Yeah.
just being aware of those things. This
Yep.
isn't like you and I are really careful, because we don't ever want to get to a place where we're telling you to judge. I just did my quotes for you, got in my
Right.
hand for the podcast
Yeah.
people, listeners, where we're just, trying to find bad things. That's not what we're
Yeah.
doing, but taking the whole garden in
Yeah.
and saying, okay, let me see what the patterns are here. What are their
The
cycles?
patterns. Yes. That's key. The patterns are the key.
Absolutely.
And, I want to go back what you said about the difference between judging and being fruit inspectors. Judging is when we assume that we know someone's motives behind their actions.
There you go. Yes.
Being a fruit inspector is simply looking at the product. What is their life producing? What do you see coming out of that person's life? That's just basic observation. That's the difference between being judgmental and being a fruit inspector. And
There you go.
wisdom says that we should be fruit inspectors. And as I was thinking through this part of it, and I was thinking, like, I put together my own little litmus test of friendship, something that I run through when I'm trying to decide on whether or not I want to be friends with somebody, or sometimes whether or not it's time for me to kind of back out of a relationship.
Right.
And I found 5 things that personally I feel like are a good litmus test for friendship. Number
Okay.
1, do I enjoy this person's presence? Like,
Right.
like, how many relationships have we been in that when you get honest with yourself, you're like, I don't even really enjoy being around them. But here you are calling yourself their friend. So do I
Right.
enjoy this person's presence? Does their presence in my life enrich my life in some meaningful way that makes the struggles, because all relationships are going to have struggles, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But makes the struggles worth it. And guys, whether we want to admit this or not, all relationships, like Lisa just said, all relationships are transactional. That means there has to be a very delicate balance of give and take. And there's going to be seasons where one of my friends might need a lot of taking because they might be going through something. So I just need
Right.
to be okay with that and give out and give out and give out. But at some point, that has to kind of balance out for the relationship to be healthy.
Exactly.
And then 3, what is the payoff? Like, what is the payoff in this relationship? And you can probably think of your top 3 or 4 friends, and quickly, like, I have a friend who we have a lot of fun together. And then I have a friend who, like, you're my friend who truly, it's iron sharpening iron. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's I think one of our big roles in each other's lives. Obviously, we don't get to have a lot of fun together because we're not together a lot in person. We don't live in the same city, but just understanding that that is your friend role in my life, there is a payoff
Mm-hmm.
that makes the struggle worth it.
Right.
Does this person take responsibility for themselves and their own life and respect me as a person and my boundaries? And then the last one is, do they repeatedly cause pain that affects my mental, emotional, or spiritual health? That
That's
last
good.
question to me is so important. It's like you said, you want to look for patterns of behavior, not just once in a while somebody may do something that's off kilter, but are they repeatedly causing me
Mm.
pain that I'm having to deal with on top of dealing with my regular life, which is, usually more than enough. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my quick little litmus test of friendships.
I
Uh,
love that though, because that gives some people don't know what to look for. You know
mhm,
what I mean? Some people really don't know. They've never had the opportunity. There's 2 types of conflict in most areas of our lives. And that's like your one big time conflict, which
mhm,
is when something rare happens and something blows up. And it's, you know what I mean? A lot of people tend to sweep those under the rug, or
mhm,
they'll identify it and they move on. But then there's the other side where it's that cycle of conflict, where it really shows, to me, is a lack of maturity mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And
yeah.
you want people that are, when you were talking about the growth aspect, you want people that are looking to mature in those areas. And so if
Mhm,
there's constant cycles of conflict in their life, that is just kind of a clue for us to say, you know what, it may not be time for us to go to the friendship
mhm,
level.
mhm.
Let's just wait and keep them at the acquaintance level and see, it could be just Holy Spirit not having it his way yet, or them not submitting to him yet. It may just be that some people are just buttholes and they're going to be buttholes the rest of their life. And that's fine. That's what they can choose to do. But I don't have to allow you into an intimate place in my life if that's what you're going to be. I'm totally okay with that,
Yep.
So absolutely. I think those are just
And it's so
outstanding.
true. Yeah, it's so true that not everybody is supposed to be your friend. But that
Yes.
doesn't here's the thing. And this was good for me because I tend to be such a black and white person. Like, you're either in or you're out. Like, there's no in between.
No
That's
in
part of my
between.
personality. Like, I'm an all or nothing person. I have to work on that all the time, and I usually don't accomplish it. But not everyone is supposed to be your friend, but that doesn't mean that they have to be your enemy.
Right.
Some people so that means we don't have to burn bridges with every
Right.
person. And
Right.
some people are just better left in the acquaintance file of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn that, like, as I grow and mature and as we change, that's going to mean that not everybody is meant to go with us from our past season into our future.
Right.
Or present. And it's so important. Like, we'll be dragging dead weight baggage because we've known this person for 25 years and
Yes.
we're childhood friends, but we have nothing in common. Their life isn't producing any fruit. They're not excited when we win. They're, you know what I mean? And we're still dragging them along. Personally, I want to be around people that I enjoy their company.
Yes.
You know, people, like I said before, they have a growth mindset. They're not satisfied to just keep doing the same old, and not move forward. People that I can dream with and who are willing to be disciplined enough to move forward in life. So I jotted down a few signs of a toxic friendship. Now, this could be friendship or any relationship that is so helpful. And you can butt in on any of these to interject anything you want to say, because I know we're going to have some things. But number one, always trying to pull you down. And that kind of goes along with the second one, which is does not want to see you win. Like, these are the kind of friends that they call you a friend and you might hang out sometimes, but when you're winning in life or when something good happens, they're always throwing shade on you somehow.
Right.
And it can even be like in a passive aggressive way, like just little comments like, girl, you know, that ain't gonna last long. You know, like just negative comments, downplaying your accomplishments.
I used to be that person, just FYI. I mean, I'll be honest. I used to be that person. But if you got on my nerves, that's probably what I said to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have done it. I mean, nobody has never struggled with jealousy and envy, or maybe a time of not feeling good about yourself. But these kind of friends are never willing to just let you have a moment.
Right.
You know, to just celebrate with you. That's so important to me personally. And I've learned how difficult it is to find women who are willing to celebrate with other women. You know, we do this whole women power thing, but when it comes down to really celebrating each other, like person to person that you actually know in your real life, how much do we really champion one another?
I actually find that most women that say they empower women actually don't.
Right. It's
Here's
so
the
true.
thing. You don't need to tell me that you do it. You just need to do it.
Yeah.
So you need to take it off your bio.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and delete it and just start doing it. And then that way people can actually say, you empower women.
Yeah.
You do this.
Yeah.
And just
absolutely.
I empower women with an A. Just making that clear.
So these, you know,
you know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about. So signs, you know, another sign of toxic relationship is that they're not loyal, that, you know, meaning they don't have your back. And here's a good way you can know that someone is not loyal, that they don't have your back, that they're always coming to you and saying, so-and-so said this about you. And like, it's a pattern where so-and-so, you know, so-and-so says this about you. You know what you need to ask when you have a friend that says that to you? You need to say, so what did you say?
Right.
Like, I'm always curious to hear, like, did you defend me, or did you just listen in, or did you join in with them? It's never usually a good sign when you have somebody reporting other people are talking about you on a regular basis.
I am so bad about that, because you know what I would probably say if they told me? I'd probably be like, well, okay. Like, I'm just so to the point where I'm like, okay, like, I don't even care. But then that kind of lets me know I should ask questions, but it's usually from somebody that I don't consider a friend in the first place. They're more like acquaintances. Well, so that's why a lot of things that I say are okay.
Yeah, I get that. But if she calls herself your friend, next time you need to say, well, what did you say? I'm just curious.
I might just ask out of curiosity.
The story where Jesus said that in the Bible, who did he say it to? Was it Peter?
Well, who do you say I am?
Well, who do you, and they were saying, Jesus, here's what they're saying you are. And then he looked at him and said, well, who do you say? Because all that mattered to him was what his friends that he held dear, what his friends thought about him mattered more than what the crowds thought about him. And I think that's true for all of us too.
Absolutely.
So you can't, you know, they always have the scoop on what other people are saying about you. You can't trust them. Meaning, you know, that if you share something really personal with them, the whole neighborhood's going to know. And you're going to find out through the grapevine information, you know, that you only told that person.
Right.
If you can't trust somebody with your real self, then they don't belong in your inner circle.
Absolutely.
People who try to make you compromise your core values, I call those frenemies. Like, they're not really for you if they're not trying to support you living out what your values are. And they're just not supportive. And I actually have had a couple friends like this where they were my friend in certain ways, but if I tried to share my goals and dreams with them, that even happened with like the podcast whenever it was first coming into fruition. And, I was so pumped and excited about sharing it with people in my life.
Mhm.
I actually did have a friend or two that when I shared it to them, it shared the idea with them, I was so deflated. Like I walked away feeling so like unsupported in it. And it
Yeah.
caused me to really doubt myself. Like, well, maybe they don't think I would be good at that. And that's why they didn't, and
Yeah.
I just can only handle so much of that before I'm like finding the
This
exit
might
door.
sound weird, but I don't even care if my friends listen to it because I get to talk to you.
It wasn't about that part because I feel the same. Like I love it regardless.
Yeah.
I'm not keeping track of who's listening, but I'm talking about just sharing. Like when you sit in front of somebody and you've got that, that excitement in your face about
Mhm.
something. They don't at all
Or they look like,
join you in that, and they are supposed to be a good friend. That just causes me to wonder, and it does, I think, negatively impact the relationship.
well, I think that just goes back. It allows you a chance to, well, maybe I need to reassess this. Maybe
Yeah.
I need to reassess this relationship and see what's
Yes.
going on here and where I need to move my fence, that
Mhm.
type of thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the last one is just they're negative. And you
Mhm.
can know if a person is negative, or some people call it negative energy, whatever you want to call it. You walk away and the time that you just spent with them, you feel drained.
I
And
call them life suckers.
yes,
They
that's what
suck
I
the
said when
life
you
out of
said
you.
that. Yeah, when you said that earlier, I was thinking of that. I have had a person in my life that when I walked away from them, I felt drained, like physically drained, and I felt bad about myself. And I noticed that it was a pattern because I'm usually a decently confident person. It's not that I don't have insecurities, because I definitely do. But every time I had spent, time with this person on one-on-one, I would feel really just down on myself, like I wasn't good enough or wasn't good at
Mhm.
things or just whatever. And I noticed that to be a pattern. So ways to know that. Go ahead.
I would just add a couple to them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like someone who is very needy and whiny, I don't do well with. I
Yeah.
feel like those are toxic traits.
Yes.
Like just constantly, I don't know. And I guess that could probably, what could it go under? It could go under negative, but I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of times it's when they're whiny and needy, it's very self-centered. So it's
Mhm.
not just bringing me down. It's just like, well, what about me? And what about,
Well,
I don't do well with that. So
when is the
being,
last time you were around a whiny, needy, complaining person and they were a life-giving person?
they're never life-giving. It's miserable. Like, and here's the thing, like I call myself a recovering pessimist, and I probably have been probably about 5 years now, just moving to a place because I couldn't always see the brighter side, but it was because I was surrounded by people who were the same way. I had to learn how to get myself out of that in order to get to a place where I started noticing like, hey, ooh, and it wasn't, again, it's not me saying you're a bad person. It was just like, that's a little too much for me. I don't need that in my life because it goes back to that growth factor. I'm really trying to come out of that. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. I want to change my life. So I can't stay here anymore. One thing's that I think I've said this before on the podcast, but my friends will tell you again, I am that person where I'm going to get down in your dirt with you and I'm going to talk to you. But once I say, let's get up, I'm getting up. I'm not staying down. If you're like, I'm not ready. If you're not ready, you can stay down in that dirt, but I can't stay down there. Once I've had some type of revelation from the Holy Spirit or some type of teaching that moves me, I can't stay where I am.
Yeah.
And so if you're the type of person that is that negative and that needy and that whiny, that is pulling somebody down, you can't get upset when they stand up and walk away. You know what I mean? You just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just had to add needy and whiny, maybe because I just don't care for that type of person. I don't know.
I love it. And people that make you feel, like I mentioned, not good enough, or even I've had a friendship where I kept asking myself, am I crazy or is this really what's happening? Like I was
Right.
always second guessing myself and maybe even doing way too much self-evaluation because
Right.
there was always something off balance and I was always trying to figure out what is wrong with me. Like, what am I
I've
not
been
doing
there.
right?
I've been there.
And you're just racking your brain and you're feeling like a horrible friend all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't figure out why. And sometimes when we are trying to love somebody, or even when we have longstanding history with somebody, we can become blinded to the truth of the situation.
Yes.
Not able to see what is really the root of all this dysfunction and chaos and drama. And sometimes it is us, and sometimes it's not us.
Right.
And I think that's why it's so important to, be able to do some self-reflection, to ask hard questions, and even ask other people in your life who know you well, who you know will tell you the truth in love.
Mm-hmm.
I love the verse in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 27:6, but it's the wounds of a friend are faithful, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And I personally, I value honesty so much in a friend. I'm okay with somebody telling me the hard truth, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to like lie to me and pretend you like me and then talk about me behind my back. Like,
Yeah.
but to be able to self-reflect, to get honest input from other people, and then of course, go to the Holy Spirit and say, show me, like reveal areas in me that are broken and still need healing.
Mm-hmm.
So lastly, I kind of wanted to wrap it up a little bit with how to break up with a toxic friend, because that can be tricky. And I
Right.
think not knowing how to break off a relationship without coming across as mean or whatever negative adjective you want to throw in there is one of the reasons that we stay in toxic friendships sometimes. And I think it's important to remember that we don't have to burn bridges unless it's a truly dangerous situation. In that case, just leave. Like, no explanation needed. But I personally think, and this is what I do when I have realized that a relationship is unhealthy, I never officially call the end, an end to it. I just
Right.
slowly back away. Like I have learned, and because I used to do this, I would go on all their social media accounts, unfollow them, everything, like make it super obvious I was done. I've gotten a little wiser.
Sorry. That made
Like,
me.
I am out. I'm unfollowing you in every way,
I'm
deleting your
done.
phone number from my phone. But so don't go unfollow them on social media or delete their number unless, like I said, it's dangerous. But just stop interacting with them. Like, stop commenting on their stuff on social media. Stop texting with them. Like, just get quiet. And as you become less and less available, it will kind of reveal the depth or lack of depth of the relationship.
Right.
Um, and you don't have to involve your other friends and pull them into it and be like, girl, I ain't have anything to do with her anymore. Just minimize the time you spend with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe only hang out with them in group settings. But stop staying in relationships that are making you miserable
Right.
in order to accommodate another person's feelings. You're not doing anybody a favor. So our goal is not to hurt the other person, but we do have to I think we have to stay true to ourselves. Um,
Absolutely. I just feel like you're so much more graceful at stuff like that than I am, because I just feel like if somebody was like, you're a really good friend, and I didn't think they were a friend, I'd be like, you're a great acquaintance. You're a great acquaintance. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And here's the thing, like, I don't necessarily, so I get on these kicks,
Yeah.
and I probably got on one a little while ago. And I basically did go through my social media and I said, who this is going to sound really ugly. Who do I really just don't care to, like, I don't really care what's going on in your life. And it's not me being rude. It's like,
Yeah.
I just don't, there's no reason. Like, am I just being nosy? Because, and I know social media is not even true friendship, but like, I just went on there. And then honestly, I was just like, who do I not want nosing into my business? Like, who do I not want? Like, I don't care if you see my children. Like, you don't need to see my children. And I literally cleaned out my account.
Oh yeah. Well, I've done the same thing. And in that case, we're not talking about real friends in that. Those are usually just
Some of them were,
yeah.
I guess they were more like acquaintances. I guess because I consider an acquaintance like one of the categories of friendship, that maybe I was thinking about that. But you're a whole lot more graceful for this. That's what in dealing with things like that. That's why I have to Look, I took notes while you were writing. That's what I
love
do
it.
during the podcast. So
I
I'm
love
like,
it.
let me write it down to learn.
Well, I'm not always graceful and gracious. Sometimes, I'm like every other person, it's easy to be led by emotions. And there are
Absolutely.
times like you really make me mad and you really like push me where I've had enough. And I have tried to be much better about not allowing things to get to a point where I'm at that place of being angry, because once I've gotten better about just going to people and saying,
Mm-hmm.
here, like, here's how you make me feel. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
tired of feeling like this. And
Yes.
I'm not trying to push the blame off on you. I'm willing to work on my side of the situation, but this has not been life-giving to me. And either we got to work on this or I've just got to be out, cuz quite frankly, I just don't have the time or the energy.
Mm-mm.
I really
Not
don't.
anymore.
And I'm not, when I say like I'm kind of fine with being by myself. When I
Mm-hmm.
say that, I'm kind of like there's some truth to that. I would
Right.
rather be by myself than have a lot of draining, toxic relationships in general, whether it's a friend or
I
whatever.
would agree with that. I think I'm that way. I am, I know you say a lot of times you're an introvert and when you get out, you love to get out. I
Yeah.
think I'm a little bit of both. Like I really love to get people together and I like having uh getting girl groups together for the
Mhm.
most part.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I'm totally okay with sitting at my house by myself. Almost like it's like a refueling for me,
Yes.
getting in the word and just being with my kids and ignoring my phone, and sometimes I'm like all up on my phone and my new thing is like I want to I just it's a little bit of both. And I think that even for me having to learn how to be intentional when I
Yes.
find myself to be being too introverted or too isolated, to reach out to my friends and say,
Same.
hey, just want to let you know I'm thinking about you. I want to know how you're doing.
Yes.
What can I do for you? Because I can get kind of carried away in that
Mhm.
being by myself thing.
I'm the same way. I have to be intentional because I can become so like independent and just self-sufficient and
Hmm.
start to believe that I really don't even need other people, which is not true. It's a lie from the enemy. But
Absolutely.
I have learned and I'm learning, and it's something I'm working on, to be more intentional about contacting one or two people a week. And I'm not saying I always do it, even if it's just to reach out through text or a quick phone
Yes.
call. One thing I've really started to do is using the voice, the audio recording function on the iPhone, where you can send an audio text, because I,
Hmm.
I just feel like that's a little more personal than just a written out text, so they can actually hear your voice.
Right.
And just checking in, with my friends. Like I have a really good friend. Her name's Kim. She lives 30 minutes from me. I think I talked about her on the last episode. But we're both busy. We both have a lot going on in our lives and we just don't see each other very much. So she happened to comment on something of mine on Facebook the other day, and I was like, let's do something this weekend. And truthfully, my head is going, you have so much stuff to do. Like, you need to work on your yard this weekend. You wanted to
Right.
paint your son's room. But at the end of the day, the to-do list is always going to be there.
Yes.
And if we aren't intentional about not just creating friendships, but tending to our garden, like
Yes.
tending to those relationships, what ends up happening is all we know and see of each other is what we see on social media. And let me tell you, if all you know of a person that you call a friend is what you're seeing once in a while on social media, that friendship is deteriorating rapidly. Let me just
Absolutely.
promise you, because you end up assuming things about that person that are completely
Yes.
untrue.
Yes.
Um, so I know, Lisa, you mentioned something just kind of as we wrap up in the last episode about friendship being a ministry of
Yes.
serving one another.
Hmm.
And I think that is so good to look at it like, how can I serve this friend? But I also think that we have to be careful that we balance that out with boundaries.
Absolutely.
Um, that yes, we are, but we're also not a doormat.
Yes.
And if there is patterns of dysfunction, patterns of hurt and pain, it's time to reevaluate that relationship and
Hmm.
decide, is it worth it? Like, is the payoff worth it? Why am I in relationship with this person? And oftentimes we find ourselves in relationships with people that maybe we're trying to fix something in them.
Yes.
I've
Yes.
definitely done that. So I think that it's important for us to remember that sometimes walking away from a toxic friendship is the loving thing to do,
Absolutely.
both for that person and for ourselves. And having the fence of boundaries actually keeps us from having to build walls.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we communicate to one
Mm-hmm.
another and we're like, here's the boundary, here's what I am and I'm not willing to do, we don't get to a place where we are so upset and hurt and bitter that we actually just want to put up a wall between us and them and say, never cross this boundary again. I'm
Right.
done. And a lot of times that's what happens in relationships. They go south because we did not put up boundaries.
Yes.
And we have to communicate those boundaries. That's the other thing I wanted to make sure, like, we can't assume that that person knows our boundaries. And
Right.
it's hard to do, but like so necessary. So it's often the loving thing to do. And sometimes we do tend to stay in a toxic relationship because we're convincing ourselves that we have something
Yes.
that person needs. And if we leave, that's not being a true friend. But guys, that is just, it's a lie from the enemy.
I think sometimes for me, I've stayed because I felt like if I left, it was immaturity.
Yes.
Like I was showing immaturity. But if it's unhealthy for you, then it's not immaturity.
Absolutely.
So just kind of like to review some of the things that we've said, we've talked about boundaries. How do we set boundaries? I think it's really important to take a brutal and honest assessment of yourself through prayer, submitting that to Holy Spirit. Then you have to define what your boundaries are going to be. And that's going to be different from relationship to relationship. You have to look at the people in your closest sphere and then work your way out and define your boundaries. And boundaries is basically taking your ownership over what belongs to you and then allowing them to take ownership of what belongs to them. And I think that's one of the most important things to realize is that there is okay, this is mine. This is what I'm responsible for. But then you're also allowing another person to take responsibility for their stuff. And that allows them a chance to grow. This can be uncomfortable, but you do have to establish consequences in case those boundaries are I guess compromised. I don't know the word for it, but if they cross, and it may not, the word consequence just brings so many bad words to your head, but it's more or less like it may be, you have to step back. They don't come to your home anymore. You only meet them in a neutral place. So and you don't necessarily have to communicate those consequences. You just need to know the consequences, or I don't like
within
that
yourself.
Word. Yeah, more or less like you just need to have a plan of what to do if the boundaries are misused and abused, and you need to make sure that you're ready to do those things if that happens. And then you do always, it's kind of like we talk about all the time, it's just a constant reassessing and a constant reevaluation, because again, boundaries aren't walls, they're fences, and they can be moved. And so if you see that a friend is really growing and maturing spiritually, and you feel like at one time they were an acquaintance because they suck the life out of you, that's my favorite phrase, but then you see they start taking responsibility for themselves and they begin to grow, and you see the fruit in their life, then maybe it's time to allow them in the gate in your yard just to see how things go. Because again, you can move people where you want them in your life. We have control over that. Again, that's the whole point of having boundaries. So, and remember that boundaries cover a lot more than just your emotional state. It's your mental state. It's even your physical state, your material state, like your actual material things, and also your time. Your time is really important. Allowing people that suck the life out of you to suck your time away is not healthy for anybody. So just remembering that those are types of boundaries. But
y'all just remember that as you're working on your yard and you're working on your garden and you're growing and you're getting healthy and you're getting healed and you're getting whole, just remember that you do not have to allow your neighbors, you have no reason that you should have to put up with your neighbors' unruly kids and psychotic and their psychotic pets pooping in your yard. You just don't have to do it. And there's so much freedom in like There's so much freedom in that, because then we don't have to feel
Absolutely.
bad about,
Mm-mm.
we don't have to feel bad about our boundaries when we recognize that
Mm-mm.
boundaries are actually, they're so loving and they protect our property, they protect others' property, and they just make for some really rich and fulfilling friendships. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So let me just share a few things as we close. So we talked about Dr. Cloud and Dr. Thompson earlier.
Mhm.
This is a really good quote from them. They say, boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. I think that's so important for us to remember. It all it is saying, this is me, this is you, this is my responsibility, this is your responsibility, this is my role, this is your role, this is what, and then you get to grow together. And so when you are taking ownership and you have boundaries, you are basically setting yourself up for success in the areas of your thought life, in the areas of your emotional state, in your feelings, in your body, and in your decision making. And so just a few things that I jotted down just out of I say my own head, but just learning and meditating on friendship is that friendships may not happen with everyone within your sphere, and that's okay. And remember that there's levels of friendship. There's the acquaintance, there's a friend, there's a close friend, and then there's a best friend. And I would say the majority of the people that I know would probably be an acquaintance. And then I would have friends, and I do have a few close friends, and then I have a few best friends. And so, and people have to climb that ladder organically in our lives. Don't force anybody in, don't force anybody out, necessarily prematurely, but allow the friendships to grow organically, allow them to unfold slowly, open yourself up, slowly allow yourself to be seen. And friendships, again, they have levels, and it's okay to not let everybody at the top. It's not a free for all. It's you get to decide who gets to be in those top levels. And if you think about it, Jesus had, well, first of all, there were more than 12 disciples, but like he had his 12 main ones, like his, so I would say the 70 disciples were his acquaintances. Remember, because he sent out 70 disciples at one time to go heal. And then he had his 12, which what I would say are his friends. And then he had Peter, James, and John, who went to the garden with him, who I would say were his close friends. And then he had his BFF, which was John the Beloved. So even Jesus had boundaries and allowed only certain people into his life. He didn't let everybody that crossed his path become his BFF. And one last thing I want us to realize is that, first of all, understand that if you are dealing with a person that has prejudices in their hearts, nobody is ever going to meet that need in them. Nobody. So that's a toxic sign that I would step away. Also, we need to realize that the enemy does not want us to enjoy friendships.
Yes.
And he will allow fear to consume us, and he will allow problems to arise that causes problems. And when we don't address them, and when we don't have boundaries, and we're not enjoying our friendships, and we're not growing in our friendships, we're actually empowering his agenda. He is against any type of relationship. I mean, look at the attack on marriage. Look at the attack on men and women separately that's causing issues of them being together. And so just remember that the enemy hates relationships in general. But a couple scriptures I just wanted to share. Proverbs 27:17 says, it takes a grinding wheel to sharpen a blade. And so no one person sharpens the character. And so one person sharpens the character of another. And I love my friends that I can learn from, just like I was writing notes when Rachel was talking tonight. I love being able to learn from you. You always give wisdom in areas, things I don't always think about. And that's why we need one another, because our perspectives are so different. And that's how we sharpen one another. It's not always about necessarily biblical things, but practical things in our lives. It's the back and forth. And also Proverbs 17:17. I've had a little bit of difficulty speaking in this podcast. So my apologies.
Do you have that Biden disease going on, girl?
That's exactly what that is. Oh, geez, oh, Pete's. Let's see. 17. A dear friend will love you no matter what.
Yes.
And I think that's what we have to remember, is that when you have true friendship, the love is unconditional. So when you mess up, the love is still there. The love isn't taken away because of something that happens.
Yes. And you can. So can I say one thing?
Yeah, girl.
So I just want to say that I love that our friendship is not one big love fest all the time, because those kind of relationships scare me a little bit, because it just doesn't feel authentic to me.
Right.
But I appreciate the fact that you are the iron that is willing to sharpen my iron, like willing to say maybe the hard thing that I might need to hear at a certain time, willing to cry with me, willing to celebrate with me, like gives me allowance to be an imperfect person without pulling away. But you truly are iron that sharpens my iron. And that's just a treasure, and I appreciate it. So thank you. I love you.
You're going to make me cry. You're going to make me cry. But I feel the same exact way. Like, I feel like even when, like a week ago, I think it was, we were talking a lot about the podcast, and then all of a sudden you sent me a message, and then you were like, wait a second, how are you doing? And even being there and understanding my crazy schedule, because when my niece was in pediatric ICU last week, and just sometimes it's just, my mind is in different places.
Yeah.
I'm trying to take care of this. I'm trying to make sure needs are met here. Plus I've still got my 2, plus I still have my responsibilities at the church. And, it's sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I need to be doing more, or what I am doing is not enough. And so sometimes just seeing those, like, hey, I got you. If you need anything, let me know. I'm praying for you. And when you pray for me when you were talking about using that voice text, that's always like, oh, I just need that,
Yes.
So I feel the same way, girl. It's so refreshing to have that in your life. And when you find those friendships, ladies, I'm telling you, when you find those friendships and you can breathe that like big, deep breath, and you really don't want anything else. You only want the real. So once you find it, it's like, okay, this is what I want. This is what I've been looking for. And I love it. And you really boundaries won't seem as scary, because you won't want anything else. Did I just close down?
No,
something?
You're good. You're good.
Okay,
you're fine.
My computer went crazy.
You're good.
I can't see you. So go ahead, keep going.
No, I mean, I was going to say, when you have those kind of friendships, I can still see you, so you're good.
Okay.
When you have those kind of friendships, you don't need a big crowd.
No.
You've got just a solid few, and your relationships become so life-giving and fulfilling that you don't need just the affirmation of being popular with a lot of people or loved by everybody, when you are loved well by a few. And I think boundaries really allow us to love each other well.
Absolutely.
So that we don't need the affirmation of the masses, if that makes sense. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've just got one thing to say.
Girl, you need some boundaries. And that was way harder to do since you can't see anything. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an hour of your life. We hope that you enjoyed this and that it blessed you and enriched your